young scholars. Well, since we're all supposed to be quarantining ourselves, I figured we'd play a little pretend today. We're pretending to stand outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which I think many of you have probably been to, whether on a field trip or with your families. I'll tell you the reason why we're here in just a minute. In today's video, we're going to look at two words that are really important to our next phase of the Renaissance. They are humanism and secularism. Now, anytime you hear or read a word that has an ism at the end of it, it should trigger in your brain that this is a belief system. This is something that people believed in. So let's start with humanism. Humanism is the idea or the belief that humans and the individual have great worth, great value, great potential, and are capable of achieving great things. Now, this might not seem like a revolutionary idea to us today. I think in today's culture, we're pretty good at recognizing and glorifying and praising people's individual achievements. But the reason why this is groundbreaking during the Renaissance is that they had just come out of the time period of the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, we know that there wasn't a lot of education going on. Definitely the opposite of a golden age. People during the Renaissance believed that in order for humans to achieve their great potential, they needed to be educated. Now, you know that the word Renaissance means rebirth, and during the Renaissance period, it was a rebirth of classical Greek and Roman knowledge. So during that time period, people started to read those ancient texts from classical Greek and Roman writers that placed a huge emphasis on education. And we know this from our study of Greek and Roman golden ages. Education was highly emphasized, particularly for the wealthy. So this resulted in a renewed interest in education for people during the Renaissance that they had not gotten during the European Dark Ages. People who were humanists or believed in humanism placed an emphasis on studying things like literature, philosophy, and history. Thanks, Renaissance! Those subjects became known as the humanities. Now, the idea of education during the Renaissance might sound like a good idea to us, but it did cause some conflict with the Roman Catholic Church. A lot of the ideas that the ancient Greek and Roman authors had came into conflict with the authority of the Catholic Church. This leads us to our second ism of the Renaissance, and that is secularism. Secularism is the belief that people should be concerned with the here and now, their lives now, instead of their spiritual life or their afterlife. Remember how everybody used to say YOLO, you only live once? This is kind of like the Renaissance version of YOLO. During the Middle Ages, people were wearing plain clothes. They weren't really concerned with having a good life now. They just wanted to be obedient to the Roman Catholic Church to make sure that they got their sacraments and then got into heaven when they died. With secularism, people began to think that their lives on earth now actually had some importance. And so they would, especially for wealthy people, they would enjoy finer clothing. They would spend money on nice food. They would listen to music. They would participate in the arts. So secularism is also a departure from religion. Now, I don't want you to think that because secularism and humanism became really important during the Renaissance, that people forgot about Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church. That's not true. Church and religion and Christianity still played a really important part of people's lives. It's just that they began to think about it in a little bit of a different way. Now, because of this emphasis on education and living life in the here and now, there came a new term out of this time period. It's called the Renaissance man. You may have heard this before. A Renaissance man was a person who was good at all academic subjects. Not just good, but excelled. They were also a good singer, musician, poet. They were good at riding on horseback. They were good at athletic things like wrestling. They might even be a good swordsman. The total package. We even use that term today, Renaissance man, to describe someone who's good at multiple things. Now, believe it or not, the idea of a Renaissance woman did exist, and it was expected that a wealthy woman would at least be educated in the classics, but she wasn't expected to showcase her knowledge or her great achievements. During this time period, wealthy merchants or wealthy banking families, even the Roman Catholic Church itself, became what we call patrons. A patron is a person who sponsors the arts, meaning they give financial support. But following along with this idea of individual achievements and just how great humans could be, came some new kinds of artwork. You remember how during the Middle Ages, often the theme was religious? Well, there were still religious themes in Renaissance artwork. In fact, there's lots of examples of that. But we do start to see a little bit of a switch. There becomes more emphasis on not just human achievement, but also the human body. We're going to talk more about Renaissance art tomorrow. But here you just see a couple of examples of people who would pay, or patrons who would pay to have their portraits taken, either of just themselves or their families. But the emphasis in artwork was no longer just on religious themes that had to do with God and spiritual life. Now you have examples that feature life during the Renaissance for the average Joe. Now, the reason why I picked the Metropolitan to stand in front of is because you could see a lot of Renaissance artwork at the Met, and I hope we get to be able to do that soon in person. And you can see a lot of examples of the ideas of humanism and secularism right in the artwork. That's it for today, scholars.